Tantor Audio, a division of Recorded Books, presents Why the Dutch Are Different, A Journey into the Hidden Heart of the Netherlands, by Ben Coates, narrated by Ciaran Saward. Publisher's note: this audiobook includes bonus material. Please visit tantor.com and type Why the Dutch Are Different into the search box. Follow the link to the book's page, then under the supplemental content section, please enter the access code HISTORY and then click the Unlock button to access the bonus material. The code should be entered in all lowercase letters.
Preface. The Queen had resigned, and it was the new King's first day at work. Amsterdam was ablaze with colour, the city's narrow brick streets flooded with an estimated 1 million people celebrating the inauguration of the first King of the Netherlands in more than 100 years. The concentric canals were gridlocked with small boats, many of them in danger of sinking under the weight of the scores of people drinking and dancing on board. It was April 2013, and the Dutch capital had been hit by a serious outbreak of what the locals called Oranjekoorts, or orange fever, a non-fatal disease whose chief symptom was the urge to cover oneself from head to toe in bright orange clothing. The choice of colour was a tribute to the Royal House of Orange, itself named after the small French town of Orange, over which its members had once ruled. Orange banners floated from the windows of the slender canal houses. Orange bunting spanned the crooked alleyways, and orange balloons hung from the tilting iron lampposts. The cobbled floor was littered with discarded orange wigs, hats, and miniature flags. Babies wore orange face paint, and a barking dog sported an orange hat, coat, and miniature feather boa. Wearing an orange T-shirt emblazoned "Ik hou van Holland," I love Holland, an orange top hat, and orange sunglasses, I felt I hadn't really made much of an effort. In Dam Square, site of the dam on the River Amstel that gave the city its name, some 25,000 people had gathered to watch the retiring Queen Beatrix hand the family business to her son, the new King Willem-Alexander. At one end of the square, the 6-story royal palace was draped with Dutch tricolour flags, the golden railings of its first-floor balcony laced with orange flowers. In front of the palace was a vast crowd of well-wishers, many of them dressed in orange fur-trimmed capes and inflatable crowns. Necks craning and cameras held high, they strained for a view of the minor royals and celebrities walking to the palace from the ancient Nieuwe Kerk, New Church, where the king had just been formally approved by the Dutch Parliament. The UK's Prince Charles sweated his way across the cobbles under a mass of gold braid and medals. Ghana's Kofi Annan grinned and waved to the cheering crowd. Queen Beatrix had announced her intention to step down a few months previously, after 33 years on the throne. It was, she said, time for the crown to pass to a new generation. Now, appearing on the palace balcony above the square, the nation's kindly grandmother looked close to tears. "Some moments ago I abdicated from the throne," she told the tangoed masses in Dutch, a light breeze ruffling her dark purple dress. "I am happy and grateful to introduce you to your new king, Willem-Alexander." The national anthem began to play, and the former queen stood back from the balcony. The new king stepped forward, ruddy as a farmer in his dark suit and pale tie, flanked by his wife Maxima, an Argentinian beauty who had shaken off her past as a junta leader's daughter to win millions of Dutch hearts. Next to the royal couple stood their 3 cherubic daughters, visibly nervous, but as pretty as Disney princesses in their matching yellow dresses. They waved to the tangerine crowd, and applause rippled through the city like thunder. My own journey to Dam Square had begun some 3 years previously, more than 5,000 miles away, in the Caribbean. Until 2010, I had worked in London as a kind of low-rent political hitman, crafting snide talking points and tub-thumping speeches for ambitious politicians, skillfully misrepresenting opponents and raking over expense claims to force the resignation of otherwise competent cabinet ministers. It was the kind of job that guaranteed invitations to cocktail parties and impressed girls in bars, and I didn't like it at all. When a national election and coalition agreement put my jubilant former colleagues in power, I found myself faced with a choice. I could either angle for work carrying a minister's bags around expensively catered international summits, or I could submit to the lucrative PowerPoint grind of a corporate lobbying job. After mulling over my options for an afternoon, I did what any sensible person would. I booked a one-way flight to Cuba. By September that year, I was on a battered 40-foot sailing boat off the coast of Belize, in possession of little more than an oaky tan and the kind of beard that guaranteed a strip search at airports. The vessel's dreadlocked crew were more interested in listening to reggae than in actually sailing anywhere, and time had collapsed into a blissfully monotonous cycle of drinking rum punch, swimming with turtles, and broiling gently in the sun. The House of Commons seemed a long way away. The few other passengers on board included a pair of sunburned English girls celebrating their graduation and making plans to save the world, and 4 sunburned Dutch cousins with backpacks, boisterous and over-friendly in the way that tall people released from a small country usually were. Bored of the rum and the turtles, I struck up a conversation with the only girl in the Dutch group, a skinny blonde with salty hair, a starfish-patterned bikini, and eyes the colour of the sea. We discussed nothing memorable, but when she disembarked that evening, I somehow convinced her to leave behind her email address, scrawled on the back of a Cubana Airlines ticket stub. Several months passed in a haze of beer, beaches, and bus rides, and I had all but forgotten about the girl on the boat, until a series of agitated messages from my bank indicated it was time to find a new job. Unfortunately, the plane carrying me back to Heathrow met with a sudden snowstorm and was diverted to Amsterdam. With all flights cancelled, an unkind security guard kicked me out of Schiphol airport, and I trudged through thick snow to a series of hotels, each overcrowded with other stranded passengers. Shivering in a t-shirt and cotton trousers better suited to Caribbean climes, I was seriously contemplating sleeping in a subway station, when I remembered that I did, in fact, know someone who lived in the Netherlands. Kneeling by a frozen canal, I dug a sun-bleached ticket stub from the bottom of my backpack and sent a message to the skinny girl, asking if she'd like to meet for dinner. She invited me round to her place in Rotterdam that evening, and I never left. Introduction. Almost Dutch. Rotterdam is not a beautiful city. A sprawling industrial conurbation of some 600,000 people, the Netherlands' second-largest metropolis has none of the canals, cobbles, or picturesque bridges of its more famous rival Amsterdam, and as such is rarely troubled by tourists. However, much to my surprise, it soon began to feel like home. Literally hours after walking out of the airport in the snow, I found myself living in a tall, crooked townhouse on a tree-lined street between a canal, a tram stop, and a bar selling tiny glasses of Heineken. My Caribbean suntan swiftly faded, and my long beard joined my tattered beach clothes in a rubbish bin on the rain-soaked balcony. By the time the snow melted, my belongings had already arrived in the post from England, and I was eating bright green Ayrton-soup, pea soup, with gusto. The skinny girl, a feisty, fiercely intelligent Rotterdammer with a pretty smile, showed no signs of kicking me out, and I began the slow process of integrating into Dutch society. One of the first things to figure out was what to call my new home. Even the Dutch themselves couldn't quite decide, referring to their country as either Holland or Nederland, the Netherlands, interchangeably. Consulting a heavy book in the library, though, I learned that, strictly speaking, the country was actually called the Kingdom of the Netherlands, just as the United Kingdom included Wales, Scotland, and assorted overseas territories. The Kingdom of the Netherlands included both the main territory in Europe, the Netherlands, and 3 colonial relics in the Caribbean, the islands of Aruba, Curaçao, and St. Martin. 3 other specks in the Caribbean, Bonaire, St. Eustatius and Saba also had the status of special municipalities. The European part of the kingdom could therefore be termed simply the Netherlands, but to label it Holland was wrong, as that name referred only to the country's two most populous provinces, North Holland and South Holland. Calling the whole country Holland was therefore rather like calling the whole of the United Kingdom England. A common mistake, but a mistake nonetheless. So, the country was the Netherlands, and the people who lived there were Dutch, and spoke Dutch, a language that sounded to an outsider like a drunk man gargling soup. Next were the bikes. In Britain, bicycles are sporting accessories used only by children, the fit, or the foolhardy. In the Netherlands, though, a third of the country ride one as their main mode of transport. Within a few weeks, I had bought two, a sturdy shopping bike with handlebars like a Frenchman's moustache, and then a lean white racing bike that weighed perhaps a fifth as much as the first one. A few weeks later came what the Dutch called a snorfiets, or miniature motor scooter, an absurd little machine the same colour as a fire engine and almost as noisy. Helmets are optional, and the miles of flat, traffic-free cycle lanes are perfect for wobbling home after a few too many Heinekens. Thirdly, unfortunately, I had to get a job. The generosity of the Dutch welfare system made it tempting to stay in bed, but sadly I soon found gainful employment, an incredibly lucrative but boring position with a major Anglo-Dutch company, sending emails from a cubicle in The Hague and trying to understand the curious habits of my Dutch colleagues. Finally came the language. Nearly all Dutch people speak perfect English, thanks to an excellent education and a population small enough to mean it isn't worth dubbing American films and television programs into the local language. However, outside of Amsterdam, it is relatively rare to hear English spoken in the street, and I quickly became frustrated at being unable to follow conversations, read menus, or tell the difference between alcohol-free beer and real beer in the supermarket. Dutch friends provided a crash course in key phrases every Englishman abroad should know. Mag ik een biertje? Can I have a beer? Je bent mooi. You are beautiful. Ik heb het niet gedaan. Ik wil een advocaat. I didn't do it. I want a lawyer. When this vocabulary proved insufficient, I took a few lessons with a private tutor, a kind, curly-haired woman who'd broken her hip in a cycling accident and was consigned to a Hitchcockian convalescence watching the birds through her rear window. We never studied as such, but gossiped in a mixture of Dutch and English, and I quickly reached a level where I could understand almost everything people said and stammer my way through a reply. Reading was harder, though, and I battled my way through picture books belonging to a Dutch friend's 18-month-old daughter. Miffy, nature, was fun, but the very hungry caterpillar was beyond me. Out in public, I still regularly made mistakes, such as the time when, instead of asking someone whether she was cold, I accidentally called her something else, beginning with C. Surprisingly quickly, the Netherlands began to feel like home. I learned how to cycle while holding an open umbrella, how to slip slimy pickled herrings down my throat in one vinegary gulp, and how to pronounce words like genoeg and Hottentotten-tenten-tentoonstelling. However, there was still much about the country that was deeply confusing. For a tiny nation, smaller than Togo or Kyrgyzstan, the Netherlands has had a huge influence on the world. The Dutch ruled over an empire stretching from the Caribbean to East Asia, founded the city of New York, discovered Australia, played the world's best football, and produced some of the finest art and architecture in Europe. Everywhere one goes in the world, one can always find Dutch people. A country half the size of Scotland, with a population of just 17 million or so, claims to have invented the DVD, the dialysis machine, the tape recorder, the CD, the energy-saving light bulb, the pendulum clock, the speed camera, golf, the microscope, the telescope, and the donut. The Netherlands has been, and still is, a kind of hidden superpower. Yet to many outsiders, including me, it remained a land defined entirely by clichés. Clogs and canals, tulips and windmills, bikes and dikes, pot and prostitutes. Bookshelves in the leafy English village, where I grew up, groaned under the weight of volumes about Italian cuisine, or the difficulties of assimilating in rural France, but when it came to the gastronomically and climatically challenged Netherlands, most people were completely uninformed. Those well-versed in the history of the Berlin Wall or the French Resistance often knew nothing about swathes of Dutch history. The vast land bridge that once connected the Netherlands to England, the famine that devastated the country in the 1940s, the Catholic traditions of the carnival-loving South, the long battle for independence from Spain, the bloody wars against the English Navy, the engineering marvel of the Delta Project, the poisonous politics of the Dutch far right. The millions of tourists who visit each year rarely leave Amsterdam, and many expats manage to live in the country for years without speaking a single word of Dutch. Like Canada or Sweden, the Netherlands is a place about which everyone knows a little, but no one knows very much. As my own ties to the country deepened, I was determined to learn more. In 2013, I set out on a series of journeys through my adopted country. Some were many miles long, while others were confined to a single city, or even building, but each aimed to understand a different aspect of the Netherlands' culture and history. The battle against the rising tides, the golden age of empire, the Second World War, the effects of immigration, the liberal approach to drugs and prostitution, and how these shaped the Dutch themselves. This book is the story of those journeys. In the course of undertaking them, I not only saw the new king inaugurated in Amsterdam, but dressed as a tiger for Easter, got drunk in a world-famous art gallery, had a picnic in a concentration camp, found Noah's Ark near the North Sea, and watched small children put on blackface before Christmas. I even broke the habit of a lifetime and went to a football match. I learned why the Dutch are always cleaning their windows, why prostitutes pay income tax, and why the Netherlands are not quite as liberal as they seem. Some things, however, remained a mystery. Chief among these was where the Netherlands was heading. During my first few months in the country, I often thought the Dutch had built something close to a perfect society. They live in one of the richest countries in Europe, but work the fewest hours, with profitable multinational companies and excellent public services to boot. Compared to their British counterparts, the average Dutch person works an hour a day less, but is about 20% wealthier. Violent crime is almost unheard of, and even major cities are bucolic, with little of the stress, pettiness and grime that plague places like London. With memories of my daily commute to Westminster fading fast, I cycled slowly to the office, worked a few hours a day, and had my bank account replenished with an unspendable torrent of euros every month, with special extra paychecks provided to cover the cost of Christmas and summer holidays. Despite drinking dozens of cups of coffee a day, the Dutch are relaxed about almost everything. Working on weekends is unheard of, while suits and ties are reserved for weddings and funerals only. For a job interview, a clean t-shirt will suffice. The Netherlands often seemed a charmingly time-warped place, with children playing safely in the streets at night, road sweepers using wooden witches' brooms, and teenagers rollerblading in the park while listening to Michael Jackson. Wandering the canals of Delft or watching the royals wave from their balcony in Amsterdam, it was easy to agree with the German poet Heinrich Heine, who allegedly said that if a war ever broke out, he would head straight for the Netherlands, because everything happens 50 years later there. Over time, though, it became clear that my initial impressions of peace and prosperity were not entirely accurate. Although there was much in the Netherlands to admire, there were also some things to be concerned about. For centuries, the country had benefited from its exposure to the outside world. Its geographical position and long seaboard helped it get rich from trade, while its overseas empire funded the development of cities like Amsterdam and artists like Rembrandt. The Dutch people's outward-looking internationalist attitude had given them a place on the world stage that it was hard to imagine being rivaled by, say, Finland or Montenegro. However, in recent years, exposure to outside forces had also created challenges. A journalist from the New York Times had described how the Dutch tend to be a little world-weary these days. The past 35 years of Dutch history is the story of innocence lost, he wrote. The noxious malaise that has long been eating at the vitals of most of industrialized Europe seems finally to have reached the Netherlands, taking much of the bounce out of this quiet, bustling nation, as the stout-hearted Dutch got their first taste of domestic terrorism, racial extremism, corporate scandal, and massive unemployment. That was in 1976. Since then, the sense of uncertainty had only intensified. The economic crisis had hit the Netherlands hard. Climate change had threatened the country's watery borders, and immigration had caused tensions in many communities. Perhaps most strikingly of all, many former liberals now thought the whole Dutch social experiment had gone too far. The country's famously permissive approach to tricky social issues had been questioned, and sacred cows like legal drug use and prostitution sacrificed. In the teenage years of the 21st century, one of Europe's smallest countries seemed to be a microcosm for the challenges facing the continent at large. Would the Netherlands be able to maintain its traditional freedoms, or were the good times over? No one seemed entirely sure. But as Amsterdam erupted in orange, the country was determined to defy the doomsayers. In their laid-back, pragmatic, untheatrical way, the Dutch were responding to change just as they always had, with drinking and dancing, and a quiet determination to maintain their unique outlook on life. For now, the country remained an island in time, arguably the most tolerant, peaceful, and prosperous corner of a generally turbulent world. "We'll keep making the wrong decisions," a friend told me, "and we'll keep enjoying the consequences." Chapter 1. Water, water, everywhere. Windmills, climate change, and the battle against the tides. One night, Johan dreamed it was going to rain. In his dream, it rained for 40 days and 40 nights. The sea rose, the rivers flooded, and still the rain kept falling. People raced for higher ground, searching for tall trees and mountaintops where they could survive the deluge, but it was no use. The waters kept rising, and the whole world was drowned. When Johan awoke, he decided to build an ark. Some 2 decades later, the completed ark floated in a dock off the River Maas in Dordrecht, an ancient cathedral city some 15 miles southeast of Rotterdam. Approaching on foot from the train station one grey February morning, I had expected something smaller, and strangely did not notice the ark until it was right above me, a vast wooden box of overlapping honey-coloured pine that towered over the weedy wasteland around it. As high as a 5-story building, the ark looked exactly like those I'd seen in illustrated Bibles as a child, with a bowed profile and a squat cabin on the top. The high sides were studded with portholes and hatches from which plastic animals peered out at the empty car park. A black and white cow at one window, a gloomy-looking horse at another. More oversized toys gazed down from the open top deck, including a life-sized plastic giraffe at the stern and an elephant at the bow. On the murky water below, a single live swan bobbed serenely like a bath toy, waiting, perhaps, to be offered a place on board. Of all the places in the world where a modern-day disciple might choose to build an ark, the Netherlands was perhaps the most logical. With more than a quarter of the country lying below mean sea level, canals, rivers, and lakes were almost as common as trees. Even a short walk or drive would involve crossing countless bridges, and even the most modest homes could be fronted by open water. More than 3,000 miles of waterway were used to transport everything from cars to cows, and many towns retained the names of the water features on which they were originally based, such as Amsterdam's dam on the River Amstel. The Netherlands isn't below sea level. A Dutchman on a ferry once told me, "The sea is above Netherlands level." Mark Twain was supposed to have said that any investor seeking profit should buy land, as it wasn't being made anymore. In most countries that would be sound advice, but in the Netherlands the opposite is true. Huge swathes of the country consist of land reclaimed from the sea, including the entire province of Flevoland. While England and Belgium are rough patchworks of fields and forests, the Netherlands is a man-made chessboard of straight lines and sharp corners. God created the world, as one popular saying goes, but the Dutch created the Netherlands. Unsurprisingly, the endless battle to stay dry has had a profound effect on the country's history and culture. After living there for a while, I came to realize that almost every distinctive feature or cliché about the Netherlands was, in some way, a result of the country's unique relationship with water. From the windmills that were used to pump fields dry, to the flatness of the land that was left behind, to the bicycles that travelled easily across the smooth terrain. Bricks paved roads built on dangerously soft ground. Tulips thrived in the silty reclaimed soil. Cows grew fat on rich, moist grass. Glasses of milk and beer were safe to drink when clean water was in short supply. People grew tall from drinking all the milk, and thick wooden clogs kept farmers' feet dry when trudging through boggy fields. Almost everything that an outsider might think of as typically Dutch could be attributed to the country's ongoing battle against the tides. The omnipresence of water had also, I came to see, had a profound effect on the Dutch themselves. Earthy and honest, with nothing to hide, the Dutch people I met were as dependable and unexotic as the landscape in which they lived. Having worked together to build a country, the way others might build a house, they also had a deeply ingrained belief in the need for hard work and order, equality and cooperation. To begin to understand the Dutch, therefore, I had to understand their relationship with water. And a journey along one of the Netherlands' largest rivers, from Noah's Ark through my adopted home city of Rotterdam and on to the North Sea, seemed like a good place to start. Into the Ark. I walked along a narrow jetty, pushed open a wooden swing door, and entered the Ark. Inside, a young Dutch woman in a Noah's Ark fleece jacket sat behind a pine reception desk in a pine reception area. I bought a ticket, €12.50 for eternal salvation, paid with a credit card, and the receptionist pointed out animal footprints painted on the rough wooden floor, leading away from the counter and into the belly of the ship. "Volg de voetstappen," she explained. "Follow the footprints." I did as I was told, and soon reached a series of nativity-style displays, nestled in the curves of the hull, each housing doe-eyed plastic animals, waiting for the waters to subside. Next to them, recovering in bed from his frenzied carpentering, was Noah, his grey beard cascading over a grubby smock, dead plastic eyes staring at a splintery ceiling. On the wall was an enlarged page from a Dutch Bible. "The flood continued 40 days upon the earth, and all flesh died that moved upon the earth. Only Noah was left, and those that were with him in the ark." The whole place smelled like IKEA. The ark had opened in 2012, some 20 years after the Dutch creationist and amateur prophet Johann Hobus had his apocalyptic dream. A well-off building contractor sporting a Mario Brothers moustache, Hobus had become convinced that the Netherlands would be submerged in an Old Testament-style flood. In 2005, he built a half-size replica of Noah's Ark, followed by the full-size replica in which I now stood. 3 years in the making, it reportedly cost well over €1 million to build. Hobus told reporters he hoped to offset the costs by taking thousands of passengers on a tour of London during the 2012 Olympic Games, but those plans were scuppered when British authorities refused the vessel permission to visit, understandably concerned that a huge floating woodpile filled with people and candles might present something of a fire hazard. According to its creator, the scale of the vessel followed the instructions laid out in the Book of Genesis. However, some concessions to modernity had been made. Unable to identify the gopher wood stipulated in the Bible, Hobus had resorted to building a Scandinavian pine skin over the metal hulls of several old barges that had been welded together. In a more serious break with tradition, rather than 2 specimens of each living creature, the ark included only a handful of small farmyard animals, outnumbered by plastic zoo animals. Perhaps for this reason, visitors were not exactly flooding in. Newspapers had reported a recent spike in interest in the Ark when an apocalyptic cult claimed the end of the world was nigh, but when I arrived, the queue to board the Ark...
Sample complete. Ready to continue?